Hi guys! Today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in October. I had a couple duds this month, but overall I had a really strong reading month. Lots of atmospheric reads, some spooky reads, but also some cute stuff too, because I needed to balance it out. I started the month with a little dark academia by reading The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. The sequel, The Atlas Paradox, just came out, so I was looking to pick this one up to see if I wanted to grab that one, and I'm still a little undecided, actually. Like I said, this is some dark academia vibes. We follow 6 strangers who are recruited to basically compete for spots within the Alexandrian Society, which surrounds the Library of Alexandria. So by being part of this society, they'd have access to a lot of lost knowledge. And it was a very interesting setup. And initially I was like very invested in all the characters. They all kind of have different special magical specialties or abilities rather. Learning about those abilities was really interesting, but as time went on and you see these characters interact and like the time that they're spending sort of sequestered in this house competing was, I don't know, I just expected it to go a little further. The climax of this book feels like it's building and building and building, and you're like, oh my god, anything could happen right now. Like, there's so much at stake. That it just kind of fizzled out, I thought, and the way that that particular scene was also written was, I thought, very confusing. You're kind of going towards this one thing, and then it doesn't happen, and the reasoning for it not happening was just incredibly vague and weird, and I don't know, I didn't care for it. Her writing is very purple, which I was fine with, and like it delves really deeply into the philosophies behind like space and time, and I thought that was really interesting, and we spent a lot of time with these characters just kind of talking about stuff, which made me a little surprised that this book was as popular as it has been, because I don't think that's necessarily the type of thing that a lot of readers are looking for. It wasn't very action-based. It wasn't a very fast read. It definitely spends a lot of time just characters in a room talking and smirking. And I don't know. So I kind of had like a middle of the way reaction to this. I gave this a 3-star rating on Goodreads. I think I'm intrigued enough to pick up the second book, but I didn't love it in the way that I had hoped I would. So I'm feeling a little tepid on this one, but we'll see how the sequel goes. Then I picked up a very cozy and seasonally appropriate book, I thought, and that is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. And this was just so cute. This gave me the same sort of feeling that House in the Cerulean Sea did. It was just like so cute and comforting. We follow a witch named Mika, and the world in which this takes place in, the witches don't really congregate because they're trying to avoid drawing attention to themselves. And as a result, Mika's really lonely. Her parents died when she was very young, and she was raised by another witch, but like at a distance. She was really more raised by nannies, and it was more of a revolving door of nannies as she was growing up, because if they caught wind of her being magical, they were fired, and then their memories were wiped. So she grew up very isolated, and she gets the opportunity to actually train 3 young witches who are all living together, which is not the norm, obviously, but there's a really strong ward on the house that they're at, and so she wants them to be more prepared for the world and with their abilities and stuff, so she agrees to teach them magic. And at this house, there's also a grumpy librarian who is just, I love the vibes. So I don't know if it was just like the kids and like mentor aspect that reminded me a little bit of House in the Cerulean Sea. I will say, I don't think the kids were written quite as believably as House in the Cerulean Sea was. Like, they're all very young in this book, and just like some of the things they say and do don't feel as young as the characters should be. But otherwise, I thought this was really cute, really charming. I liked the way that Mika's magic worked, and she was like really into potions and stuff, which was just perfect for October, and this was so cozy. This would make a good movie too, I think. So I loved it, and I gave it 4 stars. I feel like I did a lot of alternating between like spooky and cozy. So the next up was House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. This is a vampire-esque, like sapphic gothic horror thriller. It's very short, and I think while I was initially like, oh, that'll be a nice kind of break from my normal doorstopper reads, I actually kind of left this wanting more. We follow a destitute young woman named Marion, and she's currently working like as a maid in a house, but she's unhappy there, and she sees an ad to be a blood maid for a rich house up north. And the way that like the vampires are written in this book is very different from what I was expecting. They're not literally vampires, really. It's more of like a classist thing where like the ultra wealthy drink the blood of like these young girls. So she ends up in this house called the House of Hunger, and her blood apparently is just so good. And the master of the house, Lisbeth, quickly becomes very enamored with Marion and attached to her, and this causes some drama in the house with some of the other blood maids. There's like a ranking of the blood maids, and it makes waves basically. And initially Marion is really happy here, and like her improved station is making her life a lot better, but there's definitely some dark and creepy things happening in this house beyond just blood drinking, and Marion finds herself trying to get to the bottom of it. This was very atmospheric, definitely heavy gothic vibes, which was a lot of fun and exactly what I was hoping for out of this book. I think this would make a good movie too, actually, just with like how fast and just climactic it gets towards the end. I was like, it was very cinematic. I was picturing it very clearly in my head, and I think that would make an excellent couple of scenes in a movie, so I would love to see this be adapted at some point. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with this. I thought the vibes were immaculate. I just wanted a little bit more. I think I wasn't quite as attached to some of the characters because we didn't get to spend as much time on the page with them, and like all these relationships that become important to her just don't feel as important to the reader, and that just affected my feelings in the latter half of the book. But otherwise, I had a great time reading this, and I highly recommend. I gotta go back and read Alexis Henderson's other book, Year of the Witching, because I really liked her writing. Then I picked up the second book in the Caraval series, Legendary by Stephanie Garber. This one picks up pretty much right where Caraval leaves off, which I thought was great. I loved just jumping right back in. We follow actually the main character in the first one. Her name is Scarlet. We follow her sister Donatella in this one more closely. Donatella is the one kind of participating in Caraval this time, except instead of everything being a game, everything seems a little too real. I had a blast with this. I think Stephanie Garber's writing is just so fun and entertaining. I love the world that she has built within this series. It's really been fun kind of going back, starting with Once Upon a Broken Heart and then coming back to Caraval, where I see some of the seeds like that later blossom in that spinoff, but it's been great. I'm just having so much fun with this series. This book introduces Jax, which he later becomes a main character in the spin-off series, so that was really fun. I loved seeing the roots of his character, and knowing what I know about Jax in the sequels, it's definitely been interesting to see how he's introduced and his relationships with some of the main characters in this series. And I can't say too much more beyond that without kind of delving into spoilers for the first one, but this was just as fun in my opinion, and I can't wait to see how this trilogy wraps up with finale. I'll probably read that this next month, honestly. I keep saying like this book is so fun, this series is so fun, but like it really is. I can't put these books down. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't quite love Donatella as much as a protagonist. I can see like why this book was written in her point of view, but yeah, otherwise fantastic time, 4 out of 5 stars. Then my friend Stephanie came to town and we bought a lot of manga together, so I sort of abandoned my TBR for about a week and just binged manga. On Stephanie's recommendation, I picked up a couple series. I picked up the first volume in 3 different series, and then I kind of went all in on one of them. So first up is volume 1 of Kami-sama Kiss. This was really cute. I think this is a bit older because I feel like this is one that she read when we were teenagers. This one follows a girl whose father is like really addicted to gambling and has a lot of debts. In the beginning of the book, he abandons her to basically go on the run, and she has nowhere to live. She gets evicted, and it's a really, like, sad and upsetting inception. It reminds me a little bit of Fruits Basket, where, like, Toru's sort of orphaned and living in a tent. But she runs into this mysterious guy who she ends up kind of opening up to. He's like, well, I've got this place you can live. I haven't been back home in a really long time. So, like, tell my family that I miss them. But, like, yeah, you can totally live there. And she's like, weird, okay. And it's a shrine, a very dilapidated shrine. And she's like, this can't be right. So she she enters, and then she finds the spirits of the shrine living there, and she finds that she has basically been given the duty of looking over this shrine. I believe her title is Kami-sama. There's a lot of terms in this first volume that I was not quite so familiar with. I know what, like, a yokai is and a mononoke, but beyond that, it was like they were throwing a lot of terms at me that I just do not know. So I feel like my progress through this manga was a little slower than it normally would have been because I was trying to keep everything straight. But I thought this was a really cute first volume for a series. I'm definitely intrigued about picking up the following volumes. I'm actually not sure how long this series is. I think it's finished, though. Yeah, this was from 2010, so I mean, that doesn't mean anything because manga sometimes goes on forever, but I don't think this one is super long. But yeah, this was fun. I can definitely see maybe some romance coming in the future. This is a shoujo, so this was cute, and I had a fun time, and I actually don't think I put any of these on Goodreads, but I would give this a 4 out of 5 stars. And I also picked up My Dress Up Darling. This is a more mature manga series. Definitely wouldn't recommend for younger readers just because sometimes there's a bit, there's some gratuitous drawings in this book, I'll say that. But we follow 2 teenagers, one who works at I believe his grandfather's doll shop. Doll sounds weird. They're like traditional Japanese dolls, and he wants to like paint their faces when he grows up. Hina dolls. Sorry. So yeah, he dreams about growing up and painting these and selling them, but he's really worried that like his peers won't take him seriously. So he keeps it very under wraps, and he doesn't really have a lot of friends because of this. Hina dolls are like his life. He eventually befriends a really popular girl in his grade, and she's super into cosplay, but she does not have like the sewing skills to do it well. And he's like, oh, I can sew. And so they start this really cute friendship where he basically makes clothing for her so she can attend like cosplay events and stuff. I do feel a little kind of about this series in that they're both like underage, and she's into some like very revealing costumes, and even like the characters that these costumes are from are kind of more adult. So I do wish the main characters were at least 18. I'd feel a little less creepy about reading this series, but it's a cute concept, and I think if you're really into cosplay, this really goes deep into like certain tips and tricks about like makeup and costuming. I thought that was really cool. I'm not experienced at all with any of that, but this definitely seems like the author's very passionate about cosplay, or at least like learning about it. So this is fun. Just definitely be aware going into it that like it's a little, I don't want to say graphic, but like it's a little mature, and these characters are underage. So yeah. And then I read volume 1 of Witikoi, Love is Hard for Otaku, and I loved this. This is a really cute, super soft series that follows these 2 like 26, 28-year-olds, I think, that were friends in their youth, and they cross paths again when she starts working at the same company as him. And he's one of the few people that know that she is an otaku, which is basically like a nerd. She's very into manga, and specifically like BL manga. She's very secretive about this because she has been judged and rejected by her peers in the past for being a nerd. And so she tries to keep up appearances as being like a cool, friendly girl. He immediately, when they see each other and recognize each other, he's like, oh, are you going to this like it's basically like a Comic-Con thing where she sells fan manga that she makes, and she's like, shut up. But they strike up their friendship again because they're both still really into the same things. He's super into gaming, like that's his otaku-ness. And he doesn't hide it at all, though. But he's also very uninterested in his peers and like making friendships. The first volume I thought didn't flow super well narratively, but I did later learn that this was adapted from what essentially is like a webcomic. I could definitely see that like in the beginning of this volume, but it definitely becomes a lot smoother throughout. And I ended up reading basically the entire series this month. There are 6 volumes. 5 of which are basically double volumes, like, or double the length of a normal volume. And yeah, I flew through these. This was so soft and cute. The romance is super slow burn, but then there's also like background couples that you're really rooting for the whole time. And just everyone is so sweet and adorable. And I loved it. And it was also really refreshing to read a shoujo manga that follows people that are my age, 20-something-year-olds trying to get through work so they can go home and enjoy their passions and not teenagers. This was super cute, and if you're into slice of life mangas, I definitely recommend. This was adorable, and I can't believe it's over. I'm very upset. Again, I didn't put these on Goodreads, but I would, with the exception of Volume 1, I'd probably give all of these 5 stars. Volume 1 maybe being like a 3-star, but otherwise, super good. Definitely worth pushing through Volume 1 and reading the rest of the series. Then I picked up Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. I feel like this was really popular last year, and I didn't get around to it last year, but I wanted to do it this year. And I got like 200 pages into this, and I didn't care. So I ended up DNFing it because I had a lot of books on my list this month that I was more excited to get to. I figured I had given this 200 pages to capture my attention, and it just didn't. There is a lot going on in this book. We open up with a serial killer getting executed, and then we also follow a man who learns that his father is dying of like colon cancer, I think, and that his father is leaving him the house that he grew up in. But this character wants nothing to do with this house because it's the source of a lot of trauma for him. He suffered a lot of abuse in his childhood from his father in this house, but it does seem like the right move for his own family. So they end up moving there. Weird stuff starts to happen. There's just like a lot of plot lines happening. The kid can like see people's fear. The wife's an artist, like a sculptor specifically, whose things start coming to life. There's this weird patch of woods where there's like a tunnel that's haunted, or like it's like a thin place between worlds or something. I don't know. There was so much happening, and it all felt like super disparate from one another, and I just didn't care how they were all going to come together, which was super frustrating. I was intrigued for like the first 50 pages, but like the family never really captured my attention. I didn't really care about their problems. I was more just like annoyed. Oh, there was also like a coal mining thing happening. I don't know. There were so many different things happening, and it was just a little too much for me to care about any single one of them. So this is painful because I was really excited about reading this book, and I feel like I had heard really good things, but it just wasn't for me, unfortunately. So I DNF'd it, didn't give it a rating. I have been raving a lot about T. Kingfisher lately, and I read 2 of her books this month, and it's just reinforcing my love. I first picked up The Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, which is hard to categorize. Obviously, it's fantasy, but it definitely is hard to be like, oh, this is middle grade, oh, this is YA, oh, this is adult, because we follow a 14-year-old who immediately, when the book starts, finds a dead body, and it's like, oh gosh, kind of alarming. And we follow a 14-year-old named Mona, who is a baker apprenticed in her aunt's bakery, and she's also a wizard, but like a very minor wizard. She can only control things made of dough. So she doesn't think much of her abilities beyond like something cute and fun and occasionally helpful in the kitchen. But she quickly learns that mages in the city are going missing, and this body that she finds is sort of the latest in a string of disappearances and potentially murders. So upon finding this body, Mona's life really gets turned upside down, and she ends up sort of finding this calling that she never really expected out of her life, having to rise above being this 14-year-old minor mage to help save the city. This tackled so much, and it was utterly charming the entire way through. I loved how the magic worked in this book. I thought that T. Kingfisher did a really good job of fleshing that out, and seeing Mona discover what she can do with her powers was just, it was so enchanting. There's also this underlying kind of storyline where like all the adults in her life have failed her, like including the ruler of the city. She shouldn't have to really rise above her station and figure this stuff out, but she's really the only one left who can. I thought that was also a really compelling story as well, and it made what could have been a very like soft, fluffy, silly read into something much deeper. So like I said, this is kind of a hard book to categorize for me. It follows a young girl, but it feels adult at times in like its themes with all these murders happening and like the seriousness of the situation. I think if you like T. Kingfisher, or honestly, certain parts of this book gave me Shrek 2 vibes, which I'm not going to explain, but just read it. It was just really charming and cute, and I gave this 5 stars. And then on the total opposite end of that spectrum, I read The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, which is an adult horror for sure. This is one of the scariest books I think I've ever read, and I don't necessarily think it'll be that for everyone, but this book just ticked a lot of my, like, what makes Lexi anxious boxes. We follow a character named Kara who is recently divorced, and she ends up working at her uncle's curiosity museum. If you've ever seen Gravity Falls, it gave me Uncle Stan vibes, and like his whole museum. It's filled with taxidermy and cryptids and just wonky, bizarre stuff. But he is really passionate about the museum, and she grew up there and is very fond of it and agrees to help out there in exchange for living in the room upstairs. While she is working in this curiosity museum, she finds a hole in the wall, and she's like, oh, a customer knocked a hole in the sheetrock, great. But as her and her friend investigate this hole, they find a mysterious bunker. 1, there's a dead body in the bunker, and 2, this bunker takes up more space than should be physically possible. So we have a little bit of that like architectural horror, like House of Leaves vibes. And as they explore this bunker, they realize that this bunker is in another world. They get through the door and find themselves in this very creepy place with several other bunkers, and there's like this river, and there's these willow trees everywhere, and it's immediately unsettling, but they start to explore and shit just hits the fan. If you were a fan of Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, this is so much of that, like that cosmic horror stuff happening that is just beyond our understanding. It's just like a combination of so many things. Like you have the Southern Reach trilogy vibes, but then you also have like shitty Narnia vibes. It very much reminded me of The Magician's Nephew in the worlds where he's exploring like all the little ponds. It's familiar enough that the horror elements just really add to the unsettled feeling that you get, because you're like, this shouldn't be like this, but it is, and it's horrifying. Again, I don't necessarily think this will be like the scariest thing for a lot of people, but like, 1, I don't read a lot of horror. 2, the horror I do read tends to not scare me that much, but like this is a very much like a creeping dread sort of book, and when that's done right, that is what freaks me out the most. So I think T. Kingfisher did a very good job with this book. Her versatility amazes me. Like, she writes fantasy, she writes horror. Like, there's obviously some overlap in those genres, but like just vibe-wise, each thing that I read by her is so different from the last, and I'm constantly impressed. Also, the main character is a graphic designer, and I am a graphic designer, and it was just a little too easy to put myself in her shoes. So 5 stars. This was incredible. I can't wait to read the rest of T. Kingfisher's backlog. I have been so impressed with everything that I've read so far. And then I picked up Vespertine by Margaret Rogerson, which is another author that I've literally loved everything that she's written. And this is a much different vibe than the rest of her books have been. It's much darker. It's got very religious undertones. We follow a character named Artemisia, who is a Grey Sister, which is essentially a nun that cleanses and blesses dead bodies. Because in this world, if a dead body is not blessed, their soul manifests into this like malignant spirit that will eventually start plaguing the land. And so there's basically this holy order that rules this land to try to take on the evil spirits, and it's a really interesting political system and world setup, and there's these tiers of spirits. How they died affects like how or like what kind of spirit they become and how dangerous that spirit is. Artemisia ends up with an artifact that allows her to control a basically top tier spirit named a revenant. It doesn't possess her, but when she summons it, it like lives in her head, and she's able to wield its power to fight other bad spirits. The banter that her and this revenant have are like, it's so charming. There's a lot of personality that this revenant has that I wouldn't have expected going into this, because like while what's happening is really dark, like the banter adds some levity to it. And I don't know, this was just like such an interesting world. I think Margaret Rogerson, when she gives herself more time to write something, like is capable of writing just really intriguing setups. I loved every second of this book. I thought it was super compelling. I think if you're not as into books where like religion is a really big part of it, kind of like Empire the Vampire, maybe don't read this, because that is a really big part of the plot. I thought it was super well done. I was talking to my friend Stephanie about this, who grew up Catholic, and I kind of grew up in a very like non-religious household, so when we read stuff like this, we have very different opinions on it. So I want her to read this because I'd like to talk about it. It's very interesting. But yeah, I just thought like this was a really great atmospheric read for October. It's got spirits and possession, but I don't think it's overwhelmingly scary. So if you're concerned about that, I would say don't be. But yeah, I think her character work was great as well. I would have liked some more time with who is set up to be like the antagonist throughout the book. I thought that was a really interesting dynamic, and I believe there's going to be a sequel, so hopefully we will be getting that more time with them. But I loved this book, and I think I gave it 5. I think this is like a 4.5. I think I rounded it down on Goodreads. No, I gave it a 5. Okay. I loved this. Yeah. So definitely recommend. I've loved all of Margaret Rogerson's books so far, and this did not disappoint. Then I picked up Coraline by Neil Gaiman, which I've never seen the movie prior to reading this, so I was really curious. I am only familiar with some of the marketing things I had seen for the movie when, like, prior to reading this, so I didn't know a whole lot going in other than like the existence of the other mother and sort of what Coraline looked like in the movie. But otherwise, I went into this really blind, and I was very pleasantly surprised. Not that like liking Neil Gaiman is an unpopular opinion. He's very famous and well loved, but my last book by him that I read, Ocean at the End of the Lane, was not what I was expecting in like a very bleak kind of way. And this was exactly what I was expecting, which was very pleasant. We follow a girl named Coraline who is very young. I don't think her age is ever stated within the book, but she's just moved into this flat that was previously like a large house that is now been converted into several apartments. While exploring, she finds this mysterious door that has been bricked up, and she is very into, like, she's very adventurous, and like she explores the grounds a lot. And once she finds this door, she's very curious about it. Like, it's very mysterious. She's asking her parents about it, but her parents are very preoccupied in this book, and she feels like a little neglected by them in that like way that children often are when their parents can't make time for them. But through this doorway, eventually she finds a portal to basically this mirror universe, and her other mother has button eyes and is absolutely perfect. She makes like exactly what Coraline wants for dinner. She pays a lot of time and attention to her, and it's unsettling, honestly. Coraline is initially intrigued, but then quickly becomes very skeptical of this situation, and she's like, nah, I'm out. But yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that, just because I don't want to get too deeply into spoilers if you haven't seen the movie or read the book or anything. I just thought this was so charming. I will say Coraline, the character, like, read a lot younger than I was expecting. Just like the frankness, I think, in which Neil Gaiman writes really lended itself to like that very straightforward way that sometimes small children speak. So I had a really hard time figuring out how old she was supposed to be. There's this one part of the book where like her dad makes this kind of gourmet-ish meal, and she comes in, she's like, I don't like recipes, and like pulls out her dino nuggies. And I don't remember if they're actually dino nuggies, but they were like chicken nuggets or some like frozen meal that she has to microwave. And I'm like, that is such like the epitome of a picky child. And I just thought that was really charming. I don't like recipes. I thought this was like very like dark fairy tale vibes. If I had read this as a child, I don't know what I would have done. I would have had nightmares, I think. There was some very spooky elements in this book, and there's illustrations throughout that are incredibly unsettling. Like, so yeah, I'm kind of glad I didn't read this when I was younger, but reading it as an adult, I was still kind of spooked, and it was a really quick read, too. It's like 150 pages, so if you're looking for something short and atmospheric to sneak in this spooky season, I would definitely recommend this book. And finally, I read Kingdom of the Feared by Carrie Maniscalco, which is the third book in the Kingdom of the Wicked series, and I am really disappointed. I don't know what to say about this book that hasn't really already been said about the series already. It didn't bother me quite so much in the second book, the turn that it took into being a little bit more adult, because it felt like it was still straddling that like YA new adult line. But this book was more explicit than some adult fantasies I've read and some adult romances that I've read. And I feel like I sound super prudish when I'm saying that, and I promise that I'm not. It's just think if I was like 14 and I picked this book up off of a YA shelf, I would have been, I don't want to say scarred, but like surprised. I'll leave that bit at that. I definitely think this should migrate to the adult shelf with future printings. But that aside, I feel like Carrie Maniscalco really sacrificed plot for spice. It just felt like every other chapter, Amelia was like either doing stuff with Wrath or wanting to do stuff with Wrath, and it was like all she could think about, and it just like it really hindered the plot. I thought I didn't care anymore. I'm getting ahead of myself, I guess. So in this book we follow Amelia, a witch, and Wrath, a prince of hell. He's one of like the 7 deadly sins, and in this final book she's trying to solve some mysteries that have been set up from book 1, and I can't really get too deep into that. But then like a bunch of other stuff starts happening and like is introduced in this book that amounts to just nothing. Like there's this whole vampire thing that happens. Also the one vampire's name in this book is Blade. For what reason? I laughed out loud. So that was super corny. And like that whole plot line went nowhere. There was really no climax, I thought. Like, we were getting to the end, and I was like, wait, that's it? Like, it's just done? Okay. Something happens in this book in particular that I really hate in fantasy, especially when it's a female main character. And I can't say much more than that, but if you know, you probably know. Yeah, so this was super disappointing. I gave it 2 stars just because, like, 1 stars I reserve for, like, books that outright offend me, and this didn't offend me, it just disappointed me. I will probably be unhauling this series as a whole just because I thought book 1 was promising and book 2 was fun, but this just like went nowhere. It totally dropped the ball in my opinion. Wrath was barely a character. Like he was no, if I keep going down this road, I'm just gonna like never stop. So I'm gonna stop there and just leave it at, I gave it 2 stars and I'm sad. And that wraps up my October reading. Like I said, there were a couple duds in there, but for the most part, I had a really great reading month. I had a lot of fun reading everything this month. Even some of the stuff that I hated, I had fun making fun of. But you know how it is. You can't win them all. Let me know down in the comments what you read this month, or if you've read any of these books. I would love to chat about them with you. And otherwise, please feel free to check my socials out down in the description box below, like this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, have a lovely day.